In this video, artist Linda Green Metzler demonstrates her techniques for painting watercolors on plein air to the members of Northside Art Association. Linda Green Metzler began the classical study of drawing and painting at the School of Art Institute in Chicago. She has a BFA in painting from Scripps College at the Claremont Colleges, California. Linda continued her design studies at Washington University and has taught graphic design and drawing at St. Louis Community College Forest Park. Color and how it shapes the spaces that we inhabit dominate Linda's artwork and fills the rural scenes of flora and fauna as well as the urban places she portrays. She enjoys using portable water media, sometimes combined with pen and ink, to create spontaneous plein air watercolors. Linda is a juried member of Best of Missouri Hands in Fine Arts since 2004, signature member of both the St. Louis Watercolor Society and the Artists Guild of St. Louis, a member of the Missouri Watercolor Society, and is represented by the Kodner Gallery and Art Trends Gallery. And now, artist Linda Green Metzler.
One of the things I want to talk about this evening is my particular approach to landscape. And I had many years that I worked as a graphic designer. So one of the things, every painting I approach, I look at it as a graphics problem, as something to be designed as well as just painted. And the foundation for good design is drawing. So I put a heavy emphasis on drawing at the beginning of every painting. I have, over the years, developed something of a shorthand for assessing how something should be designed, but the fundamentals of proportion and perspective and depth of field and contrast and movement of line, these are all things that I automatically consider no matter what the subject is. And one of the reasons I selected these paintings today to show you is to demonstrate how whether it is a landscape, whether it's a long view or something up close like the barn you see over here, I'll lift things up so you can get a little better look, or the figure. I do a fair amount of figurative work, and I do animals as well. It's all about drawing, and it's all about design and how the different parts of the picture work together. So we're looking at shapes, and I was thrilled to see this big board up here because I can demonstrate to you what I'm talking about. My method is I don't work from photographs at all anymore because I've been spoiled by the backlight image on the computer. So if I am not in the field and I want to work from a photograph, I always put it on the screen because the backlight is so much closer to the way it looks in nature. And the light balance is so much closer to the way it is in nature. So if you have a computer, if you have access to put your photographs up on the screen and you work with it, you're going to find the flatness of the printed photograph is very, very different after you've worked with the illuminated screen. It's like the movies, you know. Why do we go to the movies? Because it simulates the real experience of being there. Well, that's what I like to do in my paintings. I want people to feel like they're visiting a place or meeting a person. And this is the method I'll tell you what I did this last weekend. I was at Louisiana, Missouri, where they had a plein air event. These are all over. If you haven't experienced them, you can't ask for more hospitality for the towns that invite the artists to come in. It's to their benefit because people make paintings of their places and their towns, and then they take those paintings back to St. Louis and other places, and it's just wonderful exposure for them. So they treat you like honored guests when you come to their town. So it's a lot of fun. They usually feed you and, give you tours of the town and maps and everything. So Louisiana was just that kind of an experience. And this is the painting that I did. It's about 4 hours in the field, and they are on the Mississippi River. If you don't know where Louisiana is, it's a charming little town. It's between Clarksville and Hannibal on the Mississippi, and there's a lot of high bluff land there. So this is the Mississippi River from the old original cemetery. This is quite a landmark there, and the view is spectacular. You can see the river. It must be on a spit of land because the river is to the left and the river is to the right. So I chose this view mainly because I got such a spectacular view of the clouds. And that's another thing. What is it that I want to tell the story of when I'm out here painting? I always try to make a decision before I start. I don't just start painting. Say, what is this painting about? Well, this one, a lot of it was about the river and the clouds. It was about the clouds. And they were so unusual that day that they really, I sort of fixated on them. And because they were so defined, it was clear, and the little clouds had beautiful shapes that were against a very blue sky that made it interesting. And then the river, you have to watch over a period of time when you're doing something like this because it changes, every 5 minutes. But I waited until I could see those clouds reflected in the river. So that's how I get an opportunity to do distribution of color. Now that's another big principle that I work with when I'm painting. There were such unusual colors in the clouds, but I didn't want those colors only to be in the top of the painting. So I searched around in the reflections in the river for where those colors popped up. And what makes any painting, whether it's oil or pastel or watercolor, interesting is complexity of colors. Let's say you have a green tree. It's the complexity of colors within that tree. You'll find violets and reds among the greens. And that's just scientifically what keeps the eye there is, oh, this isn't so simple. I don't just know it's a green tree and walk away. There's something more interesting going on here. So that was my clue. Was the unusual colors here and try to find places for them elsewhere in the painting. Going on in the photograph that I took, I like to try to plan the entire composition before I ever get to the piece of watercolor paper. I don't start in a corner, I don't start in the middle, but I start with a concept. How am I going to divide this space? So here, there are some great things going on in the foreground. I've got a little bit of hill, which is really just right in front of my feet. I've got a few of the headstones here to give us a foreground, so you'll know that, so you'll have a feeling of depth of field. I almost universally, if you look at these paintings as a whole, deal with some kind of foreground imagery, work with the middle ground, and then the background is indicated after that. Same thing here. There were some plants that I could really see the details in right in front of me at the crest of the hill, then the river in the middle, and then the clouds. It was such a great day that I could draw clouds in the distance, and I can draw ones that felt like they were going right over my head. I'm very interested in space. I've always liked to find a way to place the viewer in some special space. So that's what I'm going to try to do with this. So there's a number of things going on. I've got an anchor. I often anchor all four corners. Something, I never leave them unconsidered. They may not have a lot of activity in them, but I consider them from the beginning of the painting all the way through to the end. So it's an organic way to look at it. It's the whole. It's not one object at a time, but the thing that drives me is what is the whole impression that I want to create. So over here, there's some good stuff going on, and this is very rough, but it's almost as I said, shorthand for myself. I'm looking for my rule of thirds, and I've got a foreground tree here, which is going to come, and I don't even have to look at it, my board here, to see kind of what the space that it's going to take up. And there's an interesting curved road that's going to come in here. It's going to come, and curved roads are great because they allow us to describe space. And I always, another thing you do when you're out in the field a lot is you use that vertical and say, how far off vertical is the curve of the road? And that's one of the ways you can tell how far up does it go. I'm probably a little high here. So, but I'm going to talk about this hill by using the road to tell the story of the hill. And it's going to go off screen, so to speak. And then this is the shorthand. And then there's another kind of grassy area that has a little lighter color to it that I will use in here. And then here and there I have some statements that are made by the trees in their positions. I'm aware of heights, I'm aware of how tall things are. This and this are somewhat symmetrical where the tree comes in on the other side. And you notice I'm not worried at all about detail at this stage of the game. It's really not important. There's going to be some detail here because there's some more headstones. I've got a little bit of hill in the front here, and then this is going to indicate that this hill overlaps that hill. And then I want to have a feeling that the whole thing is thought through here. So, and a point of interest, there'll be a tree that sticks up kind of above that boring, you don't want it to be too straight across. So there is one tree there. I'm probably going to make a big deal out of it, bigger than is actually there in the picture, because it's going to help my composition. And now I'm coming downhill a little bit with the tree line. And there's a lot of great stuff going in with changes of values here. And trees are a big challenge, but there's more than one tree line in a wooded area like this. So I try to find where they overlap each other. And then over here, I'm going to have one that kind of intersects the top tree line. I have individual trees, and I have groups of trees, okay? And I'm slowly, and there's some open area back here. What I'm trying to get to here is where they meet up. So there's this, and there's this, and then there's a nice round one that could be a bit of a center of interest there because it's got a very distinctive shape and a little bit of open area. And then the fun part of this scene is that there's a spit of land above the trees here that comes out and disappears into the mist. Because the only place we see the river here is just a little bit here. A little bit of river comes in here, and then there's some trees here. So that is going to be a color issue there. And then this is going to be misty. And then I'm probably going to deal with tone on this one up there. So that's my basic plan, okay? I've got everything decided. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is shift to the piece of paper. I'm going to use this for my basic plan, and then I'm going to shift to the piece of watercolor paper over here. And I generally work when I put my initial drawing down, I work with a 2B pencil, because it's not hard enough that it makes marks or depressions in your soft watercolor paper, but it's soft enough so that when you come in with your paint, you can make those lines disappear. That you don't worry about it. They're not going to be part of your painting except to get you to where you want to be. So this is great. Now see, I've got that there. I've got this here for checking where I am. And I'm going to start to translate onto Oh, one thing I want to tell you about, I don't know, this is a wonderful little tool, whether you're working in the studio or not. I don't know if any of you have this kind of viewfinder. Have any of you worked with viewfinder? I know you have, Maggie. And, is this a new device to some of you? Is this new? Yeah. Okay, y'all know about it. You've all used them. Pardon? You can use, you know what, for years I used a slide, an empty 35 millimeter slide. That was what I used. But the nice thing about this is if you have different sizes of paper, you can change your proportion and, you know, not get too far off track when you say, oh, shoot, it doesn't fit. You don't get into that trap because there's markings on here, 8 by 12, 9 by 12. In other words, you can match it up to the size paper that you're using. It's kind of clever. They're available online. You know, everybody carries them. They're not expensive. But anyway, I do use it particularly when I'm in the field. I don't particularly need it right now, but when I'm in the field, I will. So, yeah, good. If somebody, one of the things about a demonstration is that you hope people go away with some tips. I know you're all experienced artists, but it's nice if somebody, oh, wow, I never thought of that. You'd like to go away with a tip or two. Okay, so now I am going to get a general picture here of where some of this stuff is. It's going to be very general. I'm not likely, I might use this, there's one white building that might be useful, not as a building, but just as a piece of white at the edge of this. And then I'm more interested in the road and how the road describes the hill. It kind of slants up, and then it moves up a little bit, and then it comes out here, and then it comes in here, and then there's a stone wall in this, which might be too small for you to see, but I think it's going to provide some opportunity for color contrast, because it's got a lot of red and sort of burnt sienna and that kind of color in it. And this is going to curve here. Now I get into a little more refinement when I get into pencil, because it is not such as crude as a marker to work with. And some of the contours of the hills, now that you see, when I've rehearsed like that, I've got something in my head that I have a basic idea. I've done the rehearsal, so it's like a play. They've got their lines down, okay? Then the second or third run through, they start to get into the nuance. Well, that's why I break the process down into steps, because now I don't have to think about the basic plan anymore. I've already done that. Now I can think about some of the subtleties, like you would in interpreting a piece of music. You know, where should I go high? Where should I go louder? Where should I go softer? And here I'm thinking about where should I refine the contours, and I'm looking at this a little more closely, and I'm seeing there's a lot of variations in the hills here. There's more than I saw when I was doing my basic plan, and there's a lot more that can create some interesting line work and directional stuff going on. Because one of the things that keeps people absorbed in a painting is the dynamic, the movement of the line. So I try not to lose that. I try to keep it alive that way. When you paint, you can start to get kind of static. You know, you can start to pin things down so tightly that all of a sudden that movement you felt, because you were out there in the wind and the shadows were changing, you know, that stuff kind of gets frozen, and you get a little uptight and you get tense, and I just want to get it right. Well, by doing several attacks at the same image, you can start to preserve that activity. And that's one of the reasons I have gone to, when I'm in the field, I'm kind of a slow painter. And when I'm in the field, I find that if I go mixed media, like if I use the pencil and then I go into it with ink and I preserve that activity, because I feel more comfortable personally with the ink and drawing shapes and getting them pinned down. And I'll interrupt myself here for a minute and show you that's the way this was done. This was done that way. This was a very complicated piece. There's a lot going on in there. And the only way I was able to finish it was because I had, I draw faster than I paint. Because it's more, you're only thinking about one thing. You're thinking about line, contour, and shape. So I was able to get more detail in there. So when I went into with the paint, I was very loose. You know, I was just looking, where's the orange, where's the magenta, where's the green and the blue, you know, and I wasn't trying to do shape and color harmonies at the same time. I was kind of isolating the different activities. It's just my method. It's just something that I've developed over the years that works for me. So let's see how far we can get. We don't have a huge amount of time, but I'm trying to get a basic structure here. It's almost, I had a little bit of the feeling when I was out there in that countryside, so unspoiled, that it kind of takes you back to the 19th century, and it takes you back to a time when some of the English landscape painters and Turner and, you know, it sort of puts you in a whole different frame of mind than when you work in the city in your own house where you're worrying about the dishes and the doorbell ringing and all that stuff at the same time. There's a real benefit to divorcing yourself from all of these daily activities and just becoming absorbed in the scene. And you kind of understand what some of these early landscape painters were doing when they were doing that. They were really getting away from modern life as it was then and just communing, truly communing with nature. Okay, now there's another ridge that's going to come in here. It's going to give me an opportunity, and I use an eraser too. I have a favorite. These little, I love these little black pearls. It's an eraser. You can get it from Dick Blick or something, but they have an edge on them. And you know how your eraser wears out and you erase and it's not erasing where you thought you were erasing? Well, this is probably one of the best ones I've ever used because even when it gets smaller, it still seems to maintain that sharp, see the profile? That sharp edge.
And it doesn't smear?
No, it does not smear. It's misty over here. This is going to be important because I want to get this shape interesting enough because it's going to disappear quite a bit. So I'm going to get rid of, because I don't want a lot of gray with watercolor, I try to remove as much pencil as I'm not going to make use of because it does gray your colors. It will. Especially if you want, I want a light color up there, and so it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get rid of the pencil. And then another thing I'm noticing here is I'm going to want, now that I'm into it, I see a lot of opportunity to introduce my yellows on the tops of these trees. You know, I'm not looking for the tree shape itself. I'm looking for where the color is and what is the shapes of the colors. Okay, and I'm looking for a pattern. I'm looking for something that's going to give rhythm to the piece. And motion, because I do, even though the wind isn't blowing, there's a feeling with trees that if you work with them enough, that they grow reaching a certain direction depending on where they're sited. And it can make a really nice painting if you can pick up on that. It's almost like the forest is marching, the forest is moving. So that's kind of what I'm, an idea that just popped into my head while I was doing this. And I'm a wordy person. I tend to want to, at least in my head, talk to myself about what am I really doing here. And I'll say, well, I'm creating some rhythm here, and I'm going to remember that that's where I want my yellow to go. And of course, I'm not going to want to leave it isolated up there. I'm going to want to bring it down. We have one dark trunk here that's going to be good to work with. And I see, by doing that, I see stepped back, there's one more dark trunk that's going to allow me to, and then there's another one. See, when I articulate to myself what I'm doing, I start to influence myself, and I can see, you know what, I've got a nice thing going back in space, even though this isn't a formal garden or a formal, park or something. There's still some interesting rhythms that I can pick up on that are going on. And then after this one, there's a leap, and it brings us back to this little tree over here that's going to allow us to show a little counterpoint to the movement this way. It's going to keep things from going just off the page. So I'm going to make use of this tree. It's almost like a kind of orchestration when you do something like this. And then these are going to meet up over here. And then there are going to be some little spots over here with trees. And I'm not going to do too much. I'm going to do a lot of that in paint, all right? Now, how am I going to break up this? What's really going on here? I've got the top here. I've got kind of a strip of white coming in here. It's probably like dew on the grass here is what's going on here. It's kind of like waves of moist grass because it was very foggy when we first got out there in the morning. And move over this way. And then I'm not worried about these headstones yet. I'm going to use them selectively as I want what I would call punctuation in my story here. I'm going to pick and choose about which ones that I think will work for painting. All right, enough. You guys would like to see some paint go on here, so I'm going to shift just arbitrarily. And I generally use brushes. I like rounds because I don't use flats very often because these are high quality Kolinsky sable brushes.
Is that a cat's paw?
I don't know. No, these are Kolinsky rounds. Okay, they're round. They're versatile. They hold a lot of water and a lot of paint. That's why I like them. That's the sable. You can do a very fine line with them. They're springy. You can do a very fine line with the point, but you can do a big wash if you use it sideways. So I've got all these brushes. Look, I got tons of brushes here. 9 times out of 10, I'll use 2.
I have
And that's because they're the round. That I don't know. And the other thing I use too, just to get that in, is I'm not afraid to take paint away. And I have a whole set of what they call scrubbers in watercolor. I use them a lot. I've learned how to, if you float the paint. Any of you unfamiliar with scrubbers?
No.
You've all used them? Okay. Well, it's a technique that the higher quality paper, the more effective they are. I've gone from 140. Now I'm using. There's a 260, which I kind of like. I don't like 300-pound watercolor. It's kind of unforgiving in the sense that it warps and then you can't get unwarped like the other. And it's too. I don't like the surface on a 300. It's a little too rough. But this 260 is in between the 140 and the 300. And I used it for the first time the last couple of weeks, and I'm finding I like.
What's the benefit over 140?
You can lift paint more easily.
Wow.
And I'm finding I get higher contrast because right here, I was able to get more intensity in a couple of hours than I can on 140. I have to do a lot of glazing to get the intensity, like several layers on the 140. I don't quite know why yet. I haven't really analyzed that. But I felt that I got more for my money and my time on this one with the 260. It came out more the way I wanted it to at the first few passes. Okay, now I'm going to make some basic decisions here. I generally work with the very light end of the palette first. I'm not going to put green on there yet. I'm really interested in where the paler yellow tones are going to be going, okay? And I'm going to, they look pretty intense right now, but that's because I haven't really, I'm just looking for a basic overall pattern of where the light colors are going to go. And There's an important one that's going to go in here, behind these trees, and it's going to go up, and there's one that's going to come in here, and that's going to be my dark area, and so I'm probably going to need some light in there to make that work. Okay, this is a little intense, but I'll come back. And I'm going to try to make this feel as if it's been illuminated from above, rather than more like a midday thing, but to make a midday thing interesting. A lot of times, for instance, in the little barn over there, the backlight was the main event. And the sunlight was behind the barn and was sneaking over the top of it. See, for those of you who are in the back. This was backlight. That was what was the story here. That's not the story here. The story there is top light. And it's a more challenging thing to work with. Now, I'm more interested in finding where my warm tones are going to be. You say, well, but it's all green. Why isn't she using green? I'll get to that. I'll get to that. But I want to see where the unexpected tones are going to be showing up first. See? And I see there's some orange stuff going on in here that's going to underlie the green, make it a more interesting painting. There's quite a bit over here, as a matter of fact. If you look at it, there's some good orange tone going to pop up in the grass over here. Now, there's a few areas where I'm going to look for these cooler reds, and they're going to be part of the wall. And you notice, I'm not even thinking about detail at this stage of the game. I'm going to come in after this is dry and put the details on top of that. But this is what I will call the underpainting. And it's kind of a way a lot of oil painters work, and that was my original training. So that's part of why I work in this fashion. But it gives me a foundation. And if you can be patient, a lot of this is patience with yourself. Not to worry if it looks like what you envisioned the end to look like. You know, if just be kind to yourself, withhold judgment until you've got these basic foundations built. You'll find you have a much better basis on which to construct the rest of the painting. It really is kind of like a building. And now I'm going to, see, you notice I have used pretty pure color. I'm going to go to a little more neutral, a little more ochre kind of a color, because I know that's really what's going to make this feel realistic. And the other thing is, I have a big screen on my main computer. It's 27 inches. So when I take something like this and I go full screen, it's like I'm just back out there. So I'm not worried about finding all those subtle tones, because when I get this back, and I'll finish this and I'll send it to you guys. But what I'll do is I'll get that on the big screen, and I'll find like half a dozen colors within that walkway that I couldn't see on this little screen.
Oh, so you use your bigger one.
Uh-huh, I sure do.
How many inch?
It's a 27-inch diagonal, which is pretty big. It's about like this. And I can work, one of the reasons I like the screen is I can work two images side by side, like the full image and then a detail. I can put them up simultaneously and kind of look back and forth between them. Now, the challenge, I may do something like, I saw this out there. There were eagles out there in the sky. Because I have so much here that is going to be pretty neutral, I might just take a picture of one of those eagles that I saw flying over the river and stick that in there for a point of interest, just to relieve the monotony of that kind of whitish gray. Yeah, question?
What time do you put your sky in?
Well, sometimes I'll do it right now. But see, it's going to be very subtle here because it's not like those clouds over there. It's going to be. I think I'm going to start with kind of a neutral violet, and I'm going to. Most of the time, I put it in right away. But here, I think I'm going to go with a little bit of. So whatever I do, there's going to be a big similarity between this and this, because the mist is hiding part of this hill from us. There's a hint of green. There isn't really a hint of green, but I'm going to pretend there is in here. See, so at least we know that it's trees. See, very, very subtle. Okay? By the time I'm done, this entire surface will have some paint on it. Here's a situation. It was a gray day. And my solution here was to put in as little sky as possible. But even within the sky, you can see I have different shades of that Payne's gray, one of the ones I often use when I'm in a situation like that, and then a little bit of cool blue up there, but a little bit of white showing through too, because that's really what was going on there. It looked pretty white. But I embellished it just for the sake of the painting, and so it wouldn't look like I forgot to paint it. That you don't want that. You want something. You want a deliberateness. Now I'm going to break down and put some green in there, but it's going to be a pretty cool green, I think, for starters, because a lot of this is pretty cool, and I almost think. Let's see. We want this real cool up here. And not the same green everywhere. In other words, I'm going to move around. And one of the things I always do is I make sure that something important is happening in all the corners. Now, because gray here, I'm going to pretend that there is a little bit of yellow in that sky up here, okay? And my main thing is that I do not want to leave any portion of this unconsidered. I'm going to take some of this sky color. Now we're talking about distribution of color again. We're going back to that. Oh, too much paint. That's just way too much. Here, I'm going to cool it down. You asked me about this. Why such a messy palette? Well, I remembered that I had a color there from a couple of paintings ago that might just be right for there, so I didn't wash it off. Okay, you never know when it's going to come in handy. The road here. See, this road here is going to allow me to do some nice things with. Here, let me see. And actually, it goes two ways. I didn't notice that before. But we got an intersection here at this road. I didn't see that. See? You have to accept the fact that you're going to miss stuff in your first pass. So that's why you want to stay loose enough. So, I can go back and I can change that. Okay, so this here. No, that was wrong. See, I did that wrong. Okay, I did that wrong. Okay, this really intersects here. This is the way it goes. Okay, now, since I made a mistake, I have an opportunity to show you how I fix it. Okay, that's where just a cloth, which I don't know what I did with it. Here it is. And I would take a scrubber, moderate size, float a little water on it, and then don't really scrub very much. I don't like to damage my paper, but I can lift color pretty successfully there. If I haven't put too much paint on there to start with, see? This is another reason for staying somewhat uncommitted to a lot of paint real early. because you can make changes a lot more easily. Now, since we're getting close to, quitting time here, what I want to do is show you how I start to work in values. And I'm going to work in with some of my cooler greens here, because they're going to provide me with, here's a hooker green, and they're going to provide me with a little more contrast here. Not right away, but instead of putting heavier paint of one color, what I'll do is mix it with another color, like a little bit of blue, and still keep in the same washy range. So you're not committed to like a heavy coat of green. Oh my gosh, it's the wrong green. What am I going to do? Well, keep it a little loose, and you can get sometimes a whole lot more contrast. See, I'm putting blue into that, and it gives me a deeper green than if I were to just put more green on. And then I'd probably get some lavender. What happened? What do we got here? There we go. I don't know what that was. Now, there is a little bit of green I can wash in. Now, when I have a certain color on the brush, I never want to walk away without looking for another place for what's left in the brush. So that's, again, how you get that distribution of color. And here, here I am jumping around, but I saw it, and I want to do something about it right now, is I want to get that shadow from the tree. I want to do something about that, because it just caught my eye. I'm not that methodical. See, I caught my eye there. And as that caught my eye, then the wall over here caught my eye. And I'm starting to work with that shape. How am I going to make that look like a real wall that's going to look like it has sides? It's going to be a slow build. But that's probably going to be one of my darker elements, is that brick wall there. So I'm not afraid to put some contrast in there. And there's a little bit of this reddish brown coming in over here. Okay, that's going to... All right, now, I should do something so y'all feel like I did what I promised, and do something about this area in here. And it's going to be with some of my subtle green, but we're going to now, see, now that I have my tree there, I'm starting to think about what's going to be under it in terms of shadow. What is going to go on now? That's not nearly cool enough. I have to make something a little bit cooler. So I pick up my violet and my green and mix them together. And then I see that that's going to be an interesting shadow to work with, because it has some cooler areas to it and greener areas to the back of the shadow. And then this, instead of this just being a color difference, I want it to be a value difference as well. Okay? And over here, I want to get some of the mass of that. That's a pretty massive tree there. And it's got some dark areas. Now I want to try to work this a little bit. See, now that's when I get uncomfortable with the dripping. I don't like to make, I'm not into the accident thing. A lot of watercolorists enjoy making the most of those sorts of things, but I'm a control freak, and I don't like to do that. And I'm just going to start looking for my darker values. And now here, what happens a lot on these pieces is, where does one tree group of foliage overlap another group of foliage? That's probably the hardest thing in doing trees. And at some point here, I see an opportunity in here for some interesting line work. If I blow up this area here, this is another nice feature of this. I could take an area that I'm working on like this, and then I can zoom to the selection, just that part there. See how it popped up? And I am going to pick a smaller brush, not too small, but smaller, and start to show some directional stuff going on. And I don't use a lot of brown. I tend to want to work with what we call a chromatic palette when I'm establishing the line work. And so I have probably, let's see where we're going to put this. And I really like to capture how trees grow. And I think it makes it interesting and it gives authenticity to it. And I don't always follow exactly what I see, but in a general idea. And then I notice up here, I'm not going to, this isn't a branch, but it just showed me where there was a light and dark separation there, and I'm going to go back in with green now. And move around a little bit. Now in your background, you're going to have the same opportunity to do line work, but it's further away and it's going to be more muted, just like the classic landscape painters. I had a real formula for what was fuzzy and what was clearly defined. Okay, that kind of gives me a clue as to what I'm going to do over there. Now, there's a tree that's going to be pretty, I think the hooker green and maybe some orange will give me the right tone. There's some real orange. Here we go. They make a nice brown. Here, this is where I've got some pretty good mass of color, kind of given bookends to the composition. You see how, you're creating a space that's embraced by certain elements. In this case, they're trees, but it kind of puts the arms around what it is that we're going to have our center of focus. And then there's a couple of little accents, like down here. I like the fact that there's a couple of little evergreens that can give us accents. This kind of thing works when you're in an old place. That's one of the reasons these little old towns are great, because they've had time to mature. A lot different from going to a city park that's been only there for 15 or 20 years. It's a whole different look, where nature has really taken its course, and it's more interesting than very often in the planned kind of environment. And this being an old cemetery, I mean, this had to have, the town is from the 1800s, early 1800s on, and so some of it, they have it marked. They have it the first, the second, the third section, so you know the age of the different parts of it. It's quite interesting. But your trees are going to have a whole lot of character because they've been there a really long time, and there's going to be fair amount of activity up here. So, okay, and just because, I don't know, I might take some just to be, it's arbitrary, but I think that I'm going to probably introduce some of my cool reds, because it's not a bright sunny day yet here. It's kind of misty. But so, in other words, all the areas have been considered. All of them have been. And in this last green area here, what I'm going to do is add a bit of blue because it's too dark. But I can compensate for that later. But, you're going to have
Oh, I like that green right there.
Mm-hmm. It's the contrast of what I'm trying to show you here is get away from the idea of a whole area being one color of green or one color of red. In other words, it's what makes it exciting is the variety of all of that. Okay, well, oh, and that's a mistake too. That definitely shouldn't be. So it's a raw beginning, but I guess that's what I'm demonstrating is don't get too committed too soon. Give yourself plenty of time to change your mind. And any questions?
Thank you, Linda. That was fantastic.
Okay, it's fine.
Focused in North St. Louis County, Northside Art Association is a nonprofit 501c3 arts organization that serves local artists through community exposure, networking, education, and peer interaction. Learn more about Northside Art Association at www.northsideartassociation.org.